Isen's hand was on my arm when it happened, not holding it, just resting there, the way he had done 10,000 times across 20 years of friendship, his palm warm against my sleeve, his fingers curled loosely around my wrist while he laughed at something his uncle had said. That was all. A hand on an arm at an engagement party. The most ordinary gesture in the world. And then his scent detonated. Not the usual cold marble and black cardamom that I had known since we were 7 years old. A layer underneath, locked behind a wall I did not know existed, came roaring to the surface like a furnace door blown open. Raw and desperate and aimed with a specificity that made my vision blur, directly at me. His fingers tightened on my wrist. His pupils swallowed the dark brown of his iris until there was almost nothing left. His breathing changed, went shallow and fast, and a fine tremor started in his shoulders and traveled down his arm into the hand that was holding me. Eisen. My voice came out wrong. Too low. Too rough. Like a crack had opened in my own chest in response to whatever was happening in his. He looked at me, and the expression on his face was one I had never seen in 20 years. Not at his father's funeral, not during the 3 a.m. phone calls, not in any of the 1,000 moments where his mask slipped just enough for me to see the person underneath. This was different. This was terror. Theo. His voice was barely a sound. Something is wrong with me. Across the ballroom, 200 guests were raising champagne flutes to toast his engagement to the most sought-after Omega in the city. The woman he was supposed to bond with was standing at the center of it all in a silk dress the color of cream, her perfection so absolute it looked engineered, and the alpha she was engaged to was gripping his best friend's wrist in a corner of the room, his body going into rut, and every molecule of it was reaching for the wrong person. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy today's story. I need to go back to the beginning. Not to the engagement party, not to the rut, to the part that matters, which is the 20 years before it, because you cannot understand what happened that night without understanding what Isen, Mori, and I had been to each other first. We met when we were 7. His family had just moved into the house at the end of my street, the one that was 3 times the size of every other house on the block and had a gate with an intercom that none of the neighborhood kids were brave enough to press. The Mori family was old money, real estate, the kind of wealth that did not need to announce itself because every building you walked past already had their name on the deed. Isen was their only child, their only heir, and by every metric that mattered in our world, a perfect alpha specimen. Tall for his age, confident, carrying a scent even at 7 that made adults straighten their posture when he walked into a room. I was the kid next door who could solve a Rubik's Cube in under 2 minutes and had strong opinions about bridge construction for a 7-year-old. We met because of a cat. His family's Persian had escaped through an open window, and I found it sitting on my front steps looking aggrieved. I was carrying it back to the Mori house when the gate opened, and a boy with serious eyes and a collared shirt looked at me, looked at the cat, and said, "She does not like strangers." "She seems fine," I said, because the cat was purring in my arms like a small, furry engine. He stared at me for a long time. Then he said, "Do you want to come inside? We have those popsicles that are 2 colors." I said yes because I was 7 and popsicles were a valid basis for friendship. I did not know that I was walking through a gate I would never fully walk back out of. We were inseparable after that, and competitive from the start. That was the foundation of it, the thing that cemented us before either of us had language for anything deeper. Isen was used to being the best at everything. First in his class, first picked for every team, the default leader in any room he entered. Then I beat him on a math test in 3rd grade, and the look on his face was not anger, it was delight, like he had been waiting his entire 8 years of life for someone to make him work for it. After that, it was war. Friendly, relentless, obsessive war. We competed over grades, over who could hold their breath longer, over who could build a taller card tower, over who could finish a book first, and who understood it better afterward. He beat me in history and literature. I beat him in math and physics. Neither of us ever let the other win, and neither of us ever wanted to. When we were 12, he came in second place in a district spelling bee because I eliminated him in the semifinals, and he bought me a milkshake afterward and said, "Next year, I am going to destroy you." He did. I bought him 2 milkshakes and spent the summer memorizing obscure medical terminology so it would never happen again. The competition was the language before we had a real one. It was how Isen said, "You matter to me." And it was how I said it back. You could not fight that hard to beat someone you did not respect, and you could not respect someone that deeply without it becoming something else entirely. Isen was loud with everyone else and calm with me. He performed confidence in every room he entered and dropped it like a coat the second we were alone. I was the only person who knew he was afraid of thunderstorms until he was 11. The only person who knew he cried when his grandmother died, because he did it with his face pressed against my shoulder at a sleepover, and I held the back of his head and said nothing, because even at 10 I understood that some things did not need words. As we got older, the differences between us sharpened, but the competition never stopped. Isen grew into exactly the kind of alpha his family had ordered. Broad-shouldered, commanding. The kind of handsome that made people look twice and then look away because the eye contact felt dangerous. He graduated top of his business program, took over the family development company at 25, and ran it with the controlled aggression the market expected from an alpha of his pedigree. His scent matured into cold marble and black cardamom, authoritative and expensive, the scent equivalent of a corner office. I grew into something the world had more trouble categorizing. Alpha by designation, confirmed by blood work at 14. But my version of it did not match the template. I was lean where alphas were supposed to be broad. I led with precision where alphas were supposed to lead with presence. I graduated top of my structural engineering program the same year Isen topped his business cohort, and we spent the entire graduation weekend arguing about whose achievement was harder. I started my own firm at 26, specializing in seismic resilience design, and within 3 years I had contracts in 4 states and a reputation for being the person you called when a building needed to survive something it was not built for. My scent was warm. Graphite and rain on dry pavement, which people described politely as unusual and impolitely as not very alpha. I did not posture or dominance display. I did not need to. The buildings I designed spoke loudly enough, but the world saw what it wanted to see. A quiet alpha who did not throw his weight around was, in most people's estimation, barely an alpha at all. And standing next to Isen, who was everything the designation was supposed to look like, the contrast was stark enough that people drew conclusions I never bothered correcting. I realized I was in love with him when I was 16, or at least that is what I told myself later. At the time, I did not have a word for it. I just knew that when Isen walked into a room, my posture changed, my breathing steadied. The background noise of my own life dropped to a hum. I knew that studying next to him on his bedroom floor felt more like home than my actual house. I knew that the night he fell asleep on my shoulder during a movie marathon and I sat motionless for 2 hours rather than wake him. It was not because I was being polite. But here is the thing about growing up next to someone. You cannot separate the love from the proximity. You cannot run a clean experiment when the variable has been present since you were 7 years old. Was I in love with Isen, or was I in love with being known? Was this attraction, or was it just the deepest, most practiced form of familiarity I had ever experienced? Other alphas talked about the gut punch of meeting someone whose scent hit them like a wall, the instant recognition, the biological certainty. I had never felt any of that. Not with Isen, not with anyone. His scent was as familiar to me as my own breathing, but it did not make my pulse spike, or my pupils dilate, or my body respond in any of the ways the textbook said attraction was supposed to manifest. There was no chemical evidence that what I felt was anything more than an exceptionally close friendship that my lonely 16-year-old brain had mislabeled. I spent years sitting with that uncertainty, turning it over like a structural problem I could not solve because the load calculations kept coming back inconclusive. Some days, I was sure. Some days I watched him laugh with an omega whose scent made his eyes darken and his shoulders square, and I thought, that is what real attraction looks like. And what you have is something else, something smaller. Something you built out of need because he was the first person who ever saw you as worth competing with. Eisen's mother tolerated me because Eisen insisted on my presence. She was the kind of woman who planned her son's life the way I planned a load-bearing structure, every detail engineered for maximum integrity, every element chosen for its contribution to the whole. I was not part of her plan. An alpha whose family ran a modest contracting business, no matter how successful my own firm had become, was not the companion she had envisioned for her golden heir. But Eisen would not budge. And the one thing Mrs. Mori had learned about her son was that his stubbornness, when fully engaged, could outlast concrete. So she tolerated me. And I tolerated her gaze at family dinners, clinical and faintly disappointed, like she was running calculations on my social value and the numbers were not coming back favorably. What Mrs. Mori did not tolerate, what she would never tolerate, was the possibility that her son's attachment to me was anything more than friendship. Because I was an alpha, and in Mrs. Mori's world, in the world she had built for her son, alphas did not attach to other alphas. Alphas bonded with omegas, specifically with the right omegas from the right families, with the right pheromone profiles, and the right social capital. That was the plan. That was always the plan. Meera Ashford was the plan. She arrived in our lives 3 years ago, delivered to a dinner party at the Mori estate like a beautifully wrapped inevitability. Her family owned a pharmaceutical chain that had recently merged with a biotech startup worth $500 million. She was 24, omega, and possessed the kind of beauty that functioned like a weapon. Precise, deliberate, impossible to look away from. Her scent was apricot and white silk, delicate and expensive, and designed to make every alpha in a room pay attention, which it did, including Isen. I watched it happen from across the table. The involuntary flare of his nostrils when she sat down beside him, the slight dilation of his pupils. His posture shifted, shoulders squaring, jaw tightening. The ancient biological choreography of an alpha recognizing a compatible omega. His body responded to her the way the textbooks said it should, automatically and without consulting his brain. But it was worse than just biology. They looked right together. Eisen's sharp, commanding energy and Meera's polished composure created a visual equation that made sense to every person at that table. His mother's eyes moved between them with quiet satisfaction. His uncle raised a glass. Even the serving staff seemed to register the pairing as correct, as inevitable, as if certain architectural elements simply belonged beside each other. Eisen leaned toward her when she spoke. Not consciously. His body just did it, drawn by a gravity that had been engineered into his DNA, and when she laughed at something he said and touched his forearm, he did not pull away. He smiled. A small, surprised smile, like he had not expected to enjoy her company and was recalibrating in real time. I watched that smile and thought, very clearly, oh, maybe that is what it looks like when he finds someone, and mine did nothing. I sat 6 feet from the most strategically attractive omega I had ever encountered, and my biology offered me nothing. No spike, no pull, no instinct whatsoever. My scent stayed exactly as it was. Warm graphite, steady rain, unchanged. It was not that I found her unattractive. I could see objectively that she was beautiful, but the seeing was intellectual, architectural even. I might appreciate a well-designed building without wanting to live in it. Meanwhile, Eisen's entire body was leaning toward her like a compass finding north, and the contrast between his biological certainty and my biological silence was loud enough to hear. Maybe this was the answer I had been looking for since I was 16. Maybe the reason I had never felt that gut punch of designation attraction was not because my feelings for Isen were too deep for chemicals to measure. Maybe it was because I simply was not wired for this kind of wanting, and what I had mistaken for love was just the attachment of a person who had never learned the difference. The deepest friendship of my life, misread by a lonely teenager who did not have enough experience to know that wanting to be near someone every waking moment was not the same thing as wanting them. I thought about it clinically. What was the evidence? 20 years of proximity. No biological response, no scent reaction, no pheromone shift, nothing measurable. Everything I felt for Eisen could be explained by attachment theory, by two people who had grown into each other's shape over 2 decades. Not love, just the absence of another direction to grow. I set my fork down very carefully and did not look up for the rest of the meal. Meera was smart enough to see the whole room at once, every dynamic, every leverage point, every potential ally and obstacle. I watched her scan the table with a general's eye, and I watched her clock me immediately, the quiet alpha who sat too close to Eisen, the childhood friend whose continued presence suggested an attachment that Meera recognized with predatory accuracy as the only real threat to her position. She smiled at me across the table, sweet and warm and calibrated to the millimeter. "Theo, is it? Eisen has told me so much about you." He had told her nothing about me. I knew this because I knew Eisen, and Eisen did not talk about me to people he had just met. I was the part of his life he kept private, not because he was ashamed, but because the things that mattered most to him were the things he held closest. "All good things, I hope," I said. "Of course." She reached over and touched Eisen's arm with casual possessiveness, a gesture that said mine. "He talks about his best friend like you hung the moon." Eisen's expression flickered, a reaction too fast to read, there and gone before anyone else at the table would have caught it. He did not correct her. He did not confirm her. He said, "Theo has been my closest friend since we were children," with the careful neutrality of a diplomat navigating a minefield. That was the night I learned 2 things about Meera Ashford. First, she was not stupid. Second, she was not kind. The cruelty was subtle at first, precision engineered. In front of Eisen and his family, she was warm, gracious, the perfect omega. She touched Eisen constantly, small proprietary gestures that established territory without being overt. A hand on his arm, fingers straightening his collar, leaning into his space to whisper something that made Mrs. Morey smile approvingly. But when Eisen was not in the room, the mask adjusted. The first time it happened, we were alone in the kitchen at the Morey estate after a Sunday dinner. Eisen had stepped away to take a phone call. Meera was leaning against the counter, scrolling her phone, and I was loading glasses into the dishwasher because I had been doing it at this house since I was tall enough to reach the rack, and I was not about to stop now. She did not look up from her screen when she spoke. "You know he responds to me, right?" I kept loading glasses. "Biologically, I mean. I can feel it when we are in the same room. His pheromones shift, his pupils dilate, his body knows what I am, even if his conversation skills still need work." She turned off her screen and looked at me. "Does yours do that? When you walk into a room, does he respond to you the way he responds to me?" I closed the dishwasher and leaned against it. "I think you have been his emotional support animal for 20 years, she continued, "and I think some part of you knows that. But you stay anyway because what else would you do? Where else would you go? You are not exactly in demand, Theo." She smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had identified a wound and was pressing on it with surgical intent. Other alphas collect trophies. You collect proximity to someone who will never want you the way you want him. That must be exhausting. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "You rehearsed that." She blinked. "It is good," I continued. "Sharp. Specific. The emotional support animal line is particularly strong, but you delivered it too fast, which tells me you have been waiting for Eisen to leave the room so you could use it." And the fact that you prepared a speech to intimidate me means you are not as confident about your position as you want me to believe." Her smile thinned. "Here is what I think, Meera. I think you are very smart and very strategic, and you understand exactly what you are getting in this arrangement. I think you also understand that Isen has never once looked at you the way he looks at me. Not with biology, with attention, and that terrifies you, because attention is the one thing your pheromones cannot manufacture." The kitchen was very quiet. Her expression did not crack, but it rearranged. The warmth drained out of it, and what remained was colder, more honest. The real Meera underneath the performance. "Enjoy your moral victory," she said. "I will enjoy the ring." I picked up my jacket from the back of a chair. She was not wrong about the ring. She was not wrong about biology. But she was wrong about me being easy to break, and I wanted her to know it. Meera's voice followed me toward the hallway, light and cheerful, pitched to carry just far enough. "Isen, babe, Theo is heading out. Should we walk him to the door?" He appeared in the hallway, phone still in hand, and the genuine concern in his face when he looked at me was so immediate and transparent that my throat closed. "You are leaving? We have not even started the movie." "Early meeting," I said. He studied me with that quiet, thorough attention he had always carried, the kind that saw more than I wanted him to see. His brow furrowed. His scent shifted, warmed slightly, the marble softening to something closer to heated stone. An alpha's instinctive response to distress in someone they cared about. Meera watched it happen. Her smile stayed fixed, but her eyes sharpened. That was the first time. It was not the last. She escalated after that. Smarter now, more careful, having learned that direct attacks would get returned with interest. She shifted to a strategy that was harder to counter because it targeted the one thing I could not argue with: biology. At a charity gala, standing beside me while Isen accepted an award on stage. I love watching him up there. Every omega in this room is responding to him right now. Can you feel it? That pull? "Oh, wait," she smiled. "I suppose you cannot." At Isen's birthday dinner, watching his pupils dilate when she leaned close to whisper in his ear, "It is so fascinating." He cannot help it. His body just knows. Yours must do something similar around omegas, right? Or do you not really respond to anyone? At a family brunch, watching me pour coffee for myself and Isen from the same pot. You two really do have a domestic little dynamic, do you not? If I did not know better, I would think you were the omega in this friendship. She laughed like it was a joke. No one else was close enough to hear the edge in it. The thing that made it effective was not that she questioned my worth. I knew my worth. I had built a firm from nothing, designed structures that would outlast everyone in this room, and maintained a 20-year friendship with a man who trusted me with every part of himself he hid from the world. I was not confused about who I was. What got under my skin was simpler and uglier. She was right about the biology. Eisen's body did respond to her. Involuntarily, reliably, every single time. His pupils, his posture, his pheromones, all of it performed the ancient choreography that designation had hardwired into him. And none of it happened with me. I could stand next to him for 20 years, love him with everything I had, and his body would never recognize me the way it recognized a compatible omega. That was not insecurity, that was physics, and Meera knew it. Isen did not know, not because I hid it well, but because it did not occur to him that anyone would be cruel to me in his house. He had grown up wealthy enough that the particular brand of social violence Meera practiced was invisible to him. He saw her public performance and assumed it continued when he was not watching. He was not naive. He was just someone who had never had a reason to doubt the people he let into his life, because the people he let into his life had always been me. 5 months into the engagement, I started pulling away. Not dramatically. Not in any way Isen could point to and say, something is wrong. I just became slightly less available. Responded to texts a few hours later instead of immediately. declined the third invitation in a row to Sunday dinner, citing work that did not exist, stood a little further from him at gatherings, stopped being the one who refilled his coffee, who remembered his dry cleaning, who knew without asking that he needed to leave early because crowds drained him. I was trying to do the right thing, the logical thing. Isen was engaged to an omega. His family approved. His biology cooperated. The world was unfolding exactly as it was supposed to unfold for a man like him, and the kindest thing I could do was step back far enough to let it happen without my inconvenient feelings cluttering the frame. Isen noticed in 3 days. He showed up at my apartment on a Wednesday evening, still in his suit from the office, his tie loosened and his hair pushed back, which meant he had been running his hands through it. He stood in my doorway and looked at me with those serious eyes that had not changed since he was 7 years old and said, "What is going on with you?" "Nothing." "Do not do that." "Do what?" "Lie to me." He stepped inside without being invited, as he had done since we were teenagers because the boundary between his space and mine had never existed. "You have been pulling away for weeks. You left my birthday dinner before cake. You have not been to the house in 12 days. 12 days, Theo. That has not happened since we were 19 and I was studying abroad. I am busy with work. You are an engineer. Your hours have not changed. I checked. You checked. I called your office. The audacity of it should have annoyed me. Instead, my ribs ached because of course he had. Of course. Isen, who ran a development empire and was planning a wedding and managed 100 relationships that all demanded pieces of him, had noticed my absence in 3 days and called my office to verify my excuse. "Is it Meera?" he asked. The question landed like a slap. Not because it was wrong, but because it was exactly right, and because the fact that he had guessed it meant he saw more than I gave him credit for. Why would it be Meera? Because you started pulling away around the time she started spending more time at the house, and because you will not look at me when I say her name. He was standing close enough that I could smell him. Cold marble and black cardamom. Familiar as my own breathing, but tonight his scent was doing something I had never encountered. A warm undercurrent pressing outward underneath the marble, unsteady, searching. Like a radio signal looking for a frequency. "Theo." His voice dropped. "Whatever it is, you can tell me. You have always been able to tell me anything." And there it was. The moment where the truth sat in my mouth like a live wire, and all I had to do was open my jaw and let it fall. "She is not kind to me when you are not in the room." His entire body changed. The warmth vanished from his scent. What replaced it was rare for Isen. A cold, controlled fury that dropped the temperature of my entire apartment. "Explain," I told him. "Not all of it. Not the worst of it, but enough. The comments about my designation, the implication that I was a pathetic appendage he tolerated out of habit, the omega trait jab, the faithful pet comment." Isen listened without moving. His jaw was set so tightly I could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. His hands, which had been relaxed at his sides, had closed into fists. When I finished, the silence lasted long enough that I heard my neighbor's television through the wall. "I will end it," he said. My stomach dropped. "What?" "The engagement. I will end it. Tonight if she is still awake. Tomorrow morning if she is not. Isen, you cannot call off an engagement because your fiancé was rude to your friend." She was not rude. She was deliberately cruel to the most important person in my life, and she did it systematically and in secret because she knew I would not tolerate it. That is not rudeness. That is strategy. The most important person in my life. He said it the way you say the sky is blue. No emphasis needed. "Your mother will never accept this," I said. "The merger with the Ashfords, the family alliance. She has been planning this for years. My mother does not get to plan who I keep." He stepped closer, and his scent was doing that searching thing again. The warm undercurrent pressing outward like it was trying to reach something. "Reach me." I have done everything she has asked: the company, the public appearances, the interviews, the galas, the endless performance of being exactly the alpha she designed me to be. But you are the one thing I chose for myself, and I am not letting anyone, not Meera, not my mother, not anyone, make you feel like you do not belong in my life." I could not breathe. Not because of his pheromones, though those were strong enough to fill the room. Because of his eyes. Because of the certainty in them. Because Isen looked at me with complete, unwavering, terrified focus. Like I was the only fixed point in a room that kept shifting. We stood there. Close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his chest. Close enough that our scent fields were overlapping, his marble and cardamom mingling with my graphite and rain in a way that felt new and ancient at the same time. Then his phone rang. His mother. Of course. He answered it. His expression closed like a shutter coming down, and the professional, dutiful alpha slotted back into place. "Yes. No. I understand. I will handle it." He hung up, looked at me with an apology already forming in his eyes. "I have to go. Board issue. But this is not over, Theo. Do you hear me? This conversation is not over." He left, and I stood in my apartment with his scent still tangled in the air and a feeling in my chest that I could not afford to name. If you are enjoying the story, drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from. I read every single one. All right, let us get back to the story. He did not end the engagement. Not because he did not want to, because Mrs. Morey was a force of nature who had spent 30 years bending reality to match her blueprint, and when Eisen told her he wanted to call off the wedding, she deployed every tool in her considerable arsenal. She called me first. Not Eisen. Me. Theo. Her voice was civil the same way expensive knives are civil, polished and capable of drawing blood without visible effort. "My son tells me he is considering ending his engagement because of something Meera allegedly said to you." She said it. There was nothing alleged about it. "I am sure she did." Mrs. Morey paused. "Theo, I am going to be direct with you because I believe we are both adults. Do you understand what this engagement represents for our family? A business merger disguised as a romance. A future. For Isen. For our company. For the 300 people who work for us and depend on the Ashford partnership going through. And for Eisen's legacy, which includes, eventually, children. Heirs. A family that continues." She let the silence do the work. "I know you care about my son," she continued. "I have watched you care about him for 20 years, and I have allowed it because your friendship seemed harmless. But if your presence in his life is now causing him to make decisions that jeopardize his future, his family, and his biology, then perhaps the kindest thing you could do is give him the space to build the life he was born for, with an omega, the way nature intended." She hung up without waiting for a response, which was a mistake because I had one. I called her back. She answered on the first ring, which told me she had been expecting it. "Mrs. Morey," I said, "I have respected your home, your family, and your son for 20 years. I have never asked for anything. I have never presumed anything. But I will not be managed out of his life by a phone call, and I think you know that. Or you would have done this a long time ago." The pause on her end was long enough to hear her recalculate. I did not say she was wrong. Not about the business implications, not about the 300 employees, not about the heirs. She was right about all of that, and we both knew it. The part she was right about that actually mattered. The part that kept me awake that night and the next was the biology. Children. A family that continues. Things that two alphas could not produce. Things that Isen might want someday and that I could never give him. That was not Mrs. Morey's manipulation. That was a fact. And facts were harder to fight than cruelty. But I did not pull away yet. Not immediately. Because 2 days after Mrs. Morey's call, Isen came to my apartment with a bottle of whiskey and the look of a man who had not slept. And we sat on my fire escape, knees almost touching, passing the bottle between us. I tried, Theo. Tried what? To feel it. With her. I took Meera to dinner, just the two of us. I held her hand. I looked at her across the table and I tried to make myself feel something that was not mechanical. Because if I could just make it work, then maybe this does not have to be as hard as it is. The whiskey burned going down. I took a longer drink than I needed. "And?" I asked, even though I did not want the answer. His voice was very quiet. I sat across from a beautiful omega whose scent my body recognizes, whose pheromone profile is a 96% compatibility match, and I felt nothing. Not discomfort. Not reluctance. Nothing. She told a story about her childhood, and I realized I could not remember a single detail 30 seconds later. She touched my hand, and my first thought was that your hands are rougher because of the drafting calluses, and I prefer that texture. He stopped. I am comparing her hands to yours. That is not something a person does when they are trying to fall in love with someone else. We sat with that for a while. The city noise filled the space between us, and neither of us reached for the bottle. Then he said the thing that nearly destroyed us. Maybe my mother is right. The fire escape railing was cold under my hands. I gripped it. Maybe this is a misfire, he continued. His voice had gone flat in a way I recognized, the way Isen sounded when he was making himself believe something he needed to be true in order to function. Maybe 20 years of proximity created some kind of anomalous attachment, and what I said in your apartment was just an emotional reaction to the stress of the engagement. Maybe if I commit properly, the way I should have from the start, then whatever this is will fade, the way any infatuation fades. Infatuation. The word landed between us and sat there like something dead. He did not look at me when he said it. He looked at the skyline, and his jaw was set, and his scent had gone cold and rigid and completely locked down, which was how Isen smelled when he was in so much pain that containing it required every resource he had. I understood what he was doing. He was not being cruel. He was trying to save us both from a fight neither of us could win. He was looking at the math, the family, the biology, the world as it was built, and he was trying to be the responsible one. The dutiful son. The alpha his mother had designed. And it was killing him. I could see it. The way his hand trembled around the bottle, the way his breath came slightly too fast, the way his scent kept slipping, the marble cracking for half a second before he forced it smooth again. I should have fought him on it. I should have said, "That is not what this is, and you know it." I should have grabbed his hand and refused to let go until he stopped performing for a ghost audience. Instead, I said, "Okay." He looked at me, startled. "If that is what you need to try," I said, "then try it. I will not stand in your way." The expression on his face was not relief. It was devastation, as if he had been hoping, with every cell in his body, that I would refuse, that I would fight for this so he did not have to be the one to blow up his entire life. And I had just handed him the graceful exit he was looking for, and it was the worst thing I could have done. "Theo, go home, Isen. Commit to your engagement. See if it fades." He opened his mouth, closed it, stood up, walked to my door. In the doorway, he turned back. His eyes were glassy and his voice was wrecked. "What if it does not fade? Then we will deal with that when it happens." He left. I sat on the fire escape until the bottle was empty and the sun was coming up. The next 3 weeks were the worst of my life. Isen committed. Publicly, visibly, with the full force of his considerable willpower. He appeared at events with Meera on his arm. He smiled for photographs. He sat through wedding planning sessions that Mrs. Morey scheduled with increasing urgency. He played the part so well that even I, who knew every crack in his armor, almost believed it. At 2:14 in the morning on the 9th day, my phone lit up with a text that said, "I went to the restaurant where we had your 21st birthday dinner. I sat at our table. I ordered your drink by accident. And then I sat there for 40 minutes before I realized she was not coming because I had not invited her. I had been waiting for you." I read it and did not respond. told myself it was a moment of weakness that proved nothing. I saw them together on the 11th day, not at an event, not a staged appearance. I was walking past the cafe on 9th Street where Isen and I used to study in college, and they were sitting at a table by the window. Meera was laughing at something. Not her public laugh, the one calibrated for audiences, but something closer to real. And Isen was watching her with an expression I could not categorize. His chin was propped on his hand and he was listening to her talk with what appeared to be genuine focus. And when she reached across the table and wiped something from the corner of his mouth with her thumb, he caught her hand and held it for a moment before letting go. I stopped walking, stood on the sidewalk like an idiot with a bag of takeout in my hand, and watched the man I loved hold another person's hand with something that looked, from 15 feet away through a window, like tenderness. The old doubt came flooding back. Not the dull ache I had been managing for weeks. The original doubt. The one from when I was 16. What if I had been wrong all along? What if what I felt for Isen was the world's most elaborate form of codependence, and what I was watching through that window was him finally relaxing into the kind of connection his body was actually built for? He looked comfortable with her, not performing, not rigid, not locked down. He looked like a man having coffee with a woman whose company he might genuinely be learning to enjoy. Maybe biology was not the enemy. Maybe biology was the answer, and I was the anomaly. The alpha who had convinced himself that 20 years of friendship was the same thing as romance because he had never experienced real chemical attraction and did not know the difference. I walked home. I did not eat the takeout. That night, I pulled up the Denver contract and read it properly for the first time. On the 13th day, a longer text came. One that I read 3 times and then put my phone in a drawer so I would not read it again. Something happened tonight. We were at a dinner with her parents. She was sitting next to me and her preheat scent started surfacing. Subtle, not a full cycle, just the edges. And my body responded, the usual way. Pupils, pulse, the pheromone cascade. All of it correct, all of it functional. And I thought, this is it. This is what my mother meant. This is what right is supposed to feel like. And for about 10 minutes I let myself believe it. I held her hand and I thought maybe I could do this. Maybe this could be enough. And then she said something funny and I turned to tell you and you were not there. And the 10 minutes collapsed because I realized the entire time my body had been responding to her, my mind had been composing the version of the story I would tell you later. Everything I experience twice. Once when it happens. Once when I describe it to you, and the second time is the one that feels real. I do not think that is biology misfiring. I think that is something my body does not have a name for yet. I stood in my kitchen holding my phone and felt the doubt fracture down the middle. Not disappear, but fracture. Because he was describing exactly what I had felt for 20 years, the doubled experience. Nothing fully real until it had been shared with him, and he was describing it as involuntary. Deeper than choice or habit, but the fracture was not certainty. It was just a crack in the doubt, and cracks can be patched. I put the phone in the drawer. I went back to the Denver contract. On the 14th day, a different text. My scent has not stabilized since that night in your apartment. My doctor says it is stress. I think he is wrong. I think it is looking for yours. I did not respond to that one either. On the 18th day, I started packing for Denver. A contract offer had been sitting in my inbox for 6 months. Good work. Far enough away that the proximity torture would end. I started transferring my active projects and researching apartments. I was taping a box of drafting equipment when my doorbell rang. Meera. She stood in my hallway in a camel coat and heels, looking like she had walked off a magazine cover, and her expression was something I had never seen from her before. Stripped of performance. Almost honest. He is miserable, she said without preamble. I held the door, did not open it wider. He smiles at all the right times and says all the right things, and his body does all the right things when I am near him. And he is absolutely, completely miserable. I have never seen a person go through the motions of happiness with less life behind their eyes. Why are you telling me this? Because I am not stupid, Theo. She looked at me steadily. I wanted this. I wanted him. And I was willing to fight for it, including fighting you, because I believed that eventually biology would win and he would settle into what we are supposed to be. But he is not settling. He is disappearing. And a bond built on the shell of someone who has already left is not a bond I am interested in having. I did not know what to say. She glanced at the packing boxes behind me. Her mouth thinned. You are leaving. Denver, I have a contract. Of course you do. She exhaled sharply. You are both so determined to be noble that you are going to destroy each other. He is in that house pretending to love me while you are in this apartment packing boxes. And neither of you will be the one to break first because you are both too proud and too frightened and too convinced that the other one is better off. That is not what this is. That is exactly what this is. She stepped closer, and for the first time, her scent carried something that was not strategy. It was anger. Real anger. The kind that came from watching something wasteful. I am a lot of things, Theo. I am ambitious, and I am ruthless, and I was cruel to you because I could see you were the only real threat I had. But I am not going to be the woman an alpha settles for because the person he actually loves decided to move to Denver. She turned and walked back toward the elevator. In the elevator doorway, she stopped. For what it is worth, she said, I understand why he chose you. I do not like it, but I understand it. The doors closed. I stood in my hallway surrounded by half-packed boxes and the fading trace of apricot and white silk, and realized that the cruelest, sharpest person in this entire story had just been the only one honest enough to say what everyone else was dancing around. I called Isen. He picked up on the first ring, as if he had been holding the phone. Do not go to Denver, he said before I could speak. I heard myself take a breath that went deeper than I expected. How did you know? Because I know you. Because when you are in pain, you solve it by building something new somewhere else. And because Meera just called me from her car and told me that if you leave, she will tell my mother everything. Not the version she has been performing, the real version, that I chose you, that I have always chosen you, and that no amount of engagement parties will change it. We were both quiet for a long time. I am so tired, he said. And the exhaustion in his voice was not physical. It was the bone-deep fatigue of a person who had been performing a version of themselves they could no longer sustain. I have been trying, Theo. I have been trying so hard to want what I am supposed to want. And every morning I wake up next to a person my body recognizes, and my heart does not. And I lie there thinking about the sound of your pencil on drafting paper and the way you argue with me about load-bearing walls, and I cannot do this anymore. I cannot keep pretending that obedience is the same thing as a life. Then stop, I said. The silence stretched. I could hear him breathing, could hear the catch in it, the unsteadiness that told me his composure was coming apart on the other end of the line. I am afraid, he said, of losing everything. I know. I am too. But you are more afraid of this, of us. No. I pressed my forehead against the wall of my hallway, surrounded by boxes I had been filling with the wreckage of a decision I did not want to make. I am afraid this is real, and the world will not let us have it. Then we make the world bigger, he said. We build something it has not seen before. That is what we do. That is what we have always done. You build things that survive earthquakes. I build things that change skylines. Why should this be any different? Because buildings do not have mothers, I said, and he laughed. A real laugh. Broken and wet and full of something that sounded recklessly, terrifyingly like hope. Come to the engagement party, he said. Eisen. Come. Watch me end it. Be there when I do so I can look at you and remember why. I closed my eyes, opened them, looked at the Denver contract sitting on my counter and the half-packed boxes stacked against the wall and the life I had been carefully constructing for the purpose of running away. "Okay," I said. "I will come." The engagement party was 3 weeks later. Mrs. Morey had insisted on it, had accelerated the timeline as if she could sense her architecture shifting and was racing to pour the foundation before the ground moved. Isen had tried to stop it, had told his mother twice that he needed more time. She had smiled and said, "Time is the enemy of momentum, Isen. Your father understood that." The party was at the Morey estate. 300 guests, a string quartet. Ice sculptures shaped like interlocking rings, which was heavy-handed enough to make me wince. Meera was in cream silk, circulating through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who had been trained for exactly this kind of performance. She touched Isen constantly, small, public, proprietary gestures that the guest read as affection, and I read as territory marking. I stood near the bar and watched, and the feeling in my chest was not jealousy. It was grief. For the version of this night that should have existed, where my best friend was happy and I was happy for him, and none of this was complicated. Then Meera went into preheat. It was subtle at first. A deepening of her apricot and white silk scent that made the alphas nearest to her shift in their chairs. Then it intensified, rapidly, filling the ballroom in waves that were impossible to ignore. Her cheeks flushed, her pupils dilated. Her body was doing what omega bodies did at their most potent, broadcasting availability to every alpha in range. Isen was standing 10 feet from her. I watched his biology respond in real time, the flare of his nostrils, the squaring of his shoulders, the marble and cardamom sharpening into something predatory, his body recognizing her pheromone signal and answering it with the brute mechanical obedience of designation. His jaw clenched, his hands fisted at his sides. He was fighting it. I could see the effort it cost him, the conscious override of an instinct that did not care about emotions or choices, or the man standing at the bar whose heart was breaking in slow motion. I moved toward him, not to intervene or compete, because Isen's face had gone pale and his breathing was wrong, and I recognized, before the medical reality caught up, that what was happening to him was not a normal rut response. I reached him at the same time Meera did. She put her hand on his chest, her scent pouring off her in waves, her eyes bright with the triumph of an omega whose biology was doing exactly what it was designed to do. "Isen," she said, her voice low and warm and aimed like a blade. "Let us go upstairs." He did not look at her. He was looking at me. And when I put my hand on his arm, the same place it had always rested, his rut responded. Not to her, to me. The shift was violent, his entire scent profile inverted. The predatory response to Meera's heat collapsed like a building losing its foundation. And in its place, something I had never encountered came roaring up from whatever depth it had been locked in. His pheromones turned, physically turned, and locked onto my skin like they had been searching for it all along. My hand was still on his arm. His fingers closed over mine. And inside my own body, in a place I did not know existed, something answered. Heat. Impossible heat, rolling up from my core into my chest and throat. My scent gland, the one that had produced nothing but quiet graphite and rain since the day I presented, pulsed hard enough to make me stagger. My vision narrowed to the point where his skin met mine, and a scent emerged from between us that neither of us had ever encountered. Not in any textbook, any study, any late-night database search. Petrichor after a lightning strike, clean and electric and undeniable. Meera's hand was still on his chest. Her scent was still flooding the room, but Eisen's body was no longer listening to it. His rut had chosen, with a certainty that overrode every law of designation biology, and it had chosen the alpha standing beside him, with terror and wonder, and 20 years of unspoken love written on his face. Meera felt the shift. I watched her realize it. The exact second the pheromone math changed and she understood that the alpha she had been engineering a future with was locked onto someone else. Someone whose designation made the entire scenario biologically impossible. I watched her face change. Confusion first, then recognition, then calculation. Her eyes moved between us, cataloging the contact, the scent, Eisen's body angling away from her and toward me. Then she stepped back, smoothed her dress, and smiled with a warmth so convincing that anyone watching from more than 5 feet away would have seen nothing but a gracious Omega giving her Alpha a moment to compose himself. But I was closer than 5 feet, and the look she gave me, over Eisen's shoulder in the half-second before her public mask slotted back into place, was a declaration of war. The next 48 hours were a controlled catastrophe. Eisen's rut did not break. It intensified, cycling in waves that left him trembling and disoriented, and unable to be more than 10 feet from me without his vitals spiking. We spent the night in his childhood bedroom at the estate, which was the only space available after the party, and I sat in a chair beside his bed while he lay on top of the covers fully clothed, his body burning, his scent reaching for mine in ways that made the air between us feel solid. We did not touch again. Not after the ballroom. The one point of contact, my hand on his arm, his fingers closing over mine, had been enough to trigger a cascade neither of us understood. Touching again felt reckless, like striking a match in a room that was already filling with gas. He talked through the night. Fragments at first, then longer, more coherent as his rational mind fought its way back through the rut haze. I felt it redirect. He said around 3 in the morning. I was responding to Meera. Normally. The way I always do. And then, you touched me. And it was like a switch. Everything that was aimed at her just turned. Like my body had been responding to her by default because it did not know there was another option. And the second you were there, it understood. That does not happen between alphas, I said. Clearly it does. I leaned back in the chair and pressed my hands over my eyes. Eisen, your engagement party just ended with you going into rut aimed at your male alpha best friend while your omega fiancé was in preheat 10 feet away. Do you understand what that looks like? I understand what it is. What it is impossible. He turned his head to look at me. Even in the dark, even through the rut haze, his eyes were clear. Then explain why your scent changed, he said quietly. When I locked onto you, I was not the only one whose biology responded. Your gland activated. I felt it. I smelled it. Your body answered mine. I had no answer for that. Because he was right. My gland had pulsed, my scent had shifted. My body had done something that every year of alpha biology said it could not do, and the evidence was still in the air around us, the ghost of that impossible combined scent. Petrichor and lightning. By morning, the rut had subsided enough for Eisen to function. He showered, changed, and walked downstairs to find his mother sitting in the study with the expression of a woman whose skyscraper had just developed a crack. The conversation lasted 2 hours. I was not present for it, but Eisen told me afterward. She knows, he said. He was sitting on the edge of my kitchen counter, drinking coffee from the mug I kept for him, the blue one with the chipped handle. Someone at the party noticed the pheromone shift. It got back to her. What did she say? He set the mug down. She said it was a rut anomaly, a biological misfire caused by proximity and stress. She said it meant nothing and that the engagement will continue as planned. She said the Ashfords are expecting an announcement next month and that any delay will cost the family the partnership. And you said. He looked at me. I said I cannot marry someone I am not in love with while the person I am in love with sits at the back of the church pretending to be happy for me. The quiet in my kitchen was enormous. She did not take it well, he added. No. She said if I end the engagement for you, she will cut me off. From the company, from the family trust, from the estate. She said she would rather lose a son than watch the Mori name attached to something the world will see as a designation malfunction. I felt cold. "What do you want to do?" I asked. He picked up the mug again, held it between both hands like he was trying to absorb its warmth. "I want to stop performing," he said. "I want to stop being the version of myself that other people built. I want to find out what happens when two people who have loved each other for 20 years stop pretending the only thing between them is friendship." He looked at me. "But I will not do it without you choosing it too. I will not drag you into a war with my family if you are not standing next to me willingly. So, I am asking." The mug with the chipped handle. The counter he had sat on 100 times. The apartment that smelled like both of us because he had been in it so often his scent had soaked into the walls. I crossed the kitchen, took the mug from his hands, set it on the counter. And for the first time in 20 years of loving Isen Mori, I let myself stand close enough that our scents could do what they had been trying to do since the ballroom. They braided, cold marble warming against warm graphite, black cardamom folding into the smell of rain on dry pavement, and between them, rising like a root breaking through concrete, the petrichor, the lightning, the scent that belonged to no textbook and no precedent and no one's plan except ours. "I am standing next to you," I said. His forehead dropped to mine. His breath shuddered out of him, and the sound of it was the sound of a man letting go of a weight he had carried for so long he had forgotten it was there. "Ask me again in 10 years, he whispered, "and I will still be this sure." Outside the window, the city was waking up. Inside the kitchen, two alphas stood together in a silence that tasted like the beginning of something the world had never seen. And somewhere across town, Meera was composing a text to Mrs. Mori that would change everything. The text Meera sent was 4 words. He chose the alpha. Mrs. Mori's response came in under a minute. "Come for breakfast tomorrow." I did not know about this exchange until much later. What I knew, in the days after standing in my kitchen with Eisen's forehead pressed to mine and our impossible scent hanging in the air between us, was that the world did not wait for you to be ready. Isen called off the engagement that morning. He drove to the Ashford house alone, sat in their living room, and told Meera's father that he could not continue the arrangement. He offered to absorb the full financial penalty, which was significant enough that Garrett Ashford's face went the particular shade of white that meant the number had too many zeros. Isen did not explain the real reason. He said he had come to realize that he and Meera were not compatible, that continuing would be unfair to her, and that he wished her family nothing but the best. Meera sat in the corner of the room during the entire conversation and said nothing. She watched Isen speak with the focus of someone memorizing every word for later use. He told me about it that evening, sitting on my kitchen counter again with his shoes off and his sleeves rolled up, looking more relaxed than I had seen him in months and more frightened than I had seen him ever. "It is done," he said. "How did Garrett take it? He is going to sue me." "Probably. The contract has penalty clauses that could fund a small country, but the money is not the part that worries me." "Meera," he nodded. "She did not fight it. She did not cry. She did not argue. She just sat there and watched, and that is worse than any of the other options." He was right to be worried. The first move came 4 days later at a quarterly board meeting for Mori Development. Isen had not told the board about the broken engagement yet. He was planning to do it that week on his own terms, with a prepared statement and a transition plan for the Ashford partnership. Mrs. Mori told them first. She stood in front of 17 board members, including 3 who had served with Eisen's father, and announced that her son had ended his engagement to Meera Ashford due to what she described as a personal confusion that the family was addressing privately. She used that phrase twice, personal confusion, as if what Isen felt for me was a temporary malfunction in an otherwise well-designed system. Then she nominated herself as interim chair, citing Eisen's recent emotional instability as grounds for a temporary transfer of authority. Isen told me this sitting in his car outside the Mori offices, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his scent locked down so tightly it smelled like nothing at all. That terrified me more than anything. Isen's scent going flat meant he was in so much pain that his body had simply shut down the channel. "She ambushed me," he said, in front of the entire board. 3 of them would not look at me. 2 of them shook her hand afterward. Did they vote? Not yet. She proposed it as an agenda item for next week, gave me 7 days to, her words, demonstrate renewed focus and stability. Which means go back to Meera, publicly, convincingly. That is what stability means to her. I reached across the console and put my hand on his arm. The contact sent a ripple through his scent, the marble warming for a fraction of a second before he locked it down again. "I will not do it," he said. "I need you to know that. I do not care what she threatens. I am not going back. I know. But 300 employees depend on you. What do you want to do?" "I want to fight, but I need to be smart about it." "Then be smart. She gave you 7 days. Use them." He used them. He called every board member individually, not to plead or ask for sympathy, to listen. He sat in living rooms and offices and asked each of them what they needed from Mori development, what they feared, what they hoped for. He did not mention me. He did not mention Meera. He talked about the company and the future he intended to protect. By day 5, he had secured enough votes to block his mother's interim chair proposal. The vote was pushed to the following week. Meera made her move 3 days later. She gave an interview, not a press conference. A sit-down with a journalist who covered designation politics for a major outlet, framed as a personal essay about the end of her engagement. She was composed, articulate, and devastating. She never mentioned me by name. She did not need to. What she described was worse than an affair. She told the journalist that Isen had been experiencing what she carefully called atypical designation behavior for several months, that his rut cycles had become irregular, that his pheromone responses had shifted in ways his own doctor could not explain. She said she had tried to support him through it, had encouraged him to seek treatment, but that he had refused. She described their engagement ending not as a choice he had made, but as a symptom of a condition he would not address. She never said the words designation disorder. She did not have to. The journalist used them in the headline. The implication was precise. Not that Eisen was in love with someone else, which was personal, but that his biology was malfunctioning, which was professional. An alpha whose designation was unstable could not be trusted to run a company, could not be trusted to make sound decisions, could not be trusted, period. Eisen called me at 9 that night. His voice was flat in a way that scared me. "She framed it as a medical issue," he said. "She made me sound broken." I know. The board will read it. Half of them already think my mother is right about the interim chair. This gives them permission to vote against me without feeling like they are punishing me for being in love. They can tell themselves they are protecting the company from an unstable CEO. He was right. Meera had not attacked his character. She had attacked his credibility, which was harder to defend because the defense required admitting something the world had no framework for. I sat in my apartment and thought about load-bearing walls. Every structure has a point of failure. Meera and Mrs. Mori had identified Eisen's. It was me. I picked up my phone, put it down, picked it up again. Then I called my associate and told her to reactivate the Denver transfer. Isen found out in 3 hours. I do not know how. Maybe he had been tracking the Denver contract the way I had been tracking his board votes, both of us watching each other's escape routes with the desperate attention of people who knew exactly what the other would do under pressure. He did not call. He did not text. He appeared at my door for the 3rd time in this story, and each time he had looked worse than the last. This time he looked like a man standing on the edge of something he could not come back from. "You are not doing this," he said. "I am trying to save you. By leaving. By disappearing. By solving the problem of us by removing yourself from it. The same way you tried to remove yourself from it with the Denver contract 3 weeks ago. The same way you pulled away when Meera first started. The same pattern, Theo. Every time the pressure gets real, your answer is to subtract yourself from my life. And I am telling you, right now, that subtraction is the one thing I cannot survive." His voice cracked on the last word. His scent, which had been locked flat for days, broke open. Cold marble and black cardamom flooded my apartment, but underneath it, loud and desperate and impossible to ignore, the warm undercurrent that reached for mine. "You are not the crack in my foundation," he said. "You are the foundation. You have been the foundation since I was 7 years old. Everything else, the company, the money, the name, I built all of it on top of what you gave me. If you leave, it does not matter whether the board votes in my favor. The whole thing comes down anyway." I stood in my doorway with transfer paperwork on my kitchen counter, and this man in front of me and 27 years of evidence that he was telling the truth. "Then stop letting your mother fight this battle on her terms," I said. "Fight it on yours." He looked at me. "You have been playing defense for weeks, blocking votes, making calls, reacting to whatever Meera and Mrs. Mori throw at you. But you are Isen Mori. You do not play defense. You built a development company that changed the skyline of 4 cities by the time you were 30. When did you start letting other people set the agenda?" Something happened in his eyes. The fire. The competitive, relentless, strategic fire that had been smothered under weeks of guilt and obligation and the weight of performing someone else's version of his life. It came back. Not gradually. All at once, like a pilot light catching. "I need a lawyer," he said, "and my medical records from the past year, and the Ashford financials that our due diligence team flagged 6 months ago." "How long?" "The board meets in 2 days. I need everything compiled by then." "Then I need coffee." I made coffee. He sat at my kitchen table and worked through the night, and I sat across from him with my own laptop running structural analyses for a bridge project in Portland that was behind schedule, and we worked the way we had worked since we were 12 years old. Side by side, in competitive silence, occasionally stealing glances at each other's screens and offering unsolicited opinions that were almost always correct. At 4 in the morning, he looked up and said, "Theo." "What?" "The bridge tolerance calculations on your screen are wrong. Your wind load is underestimated by 8%. I checked. He was right. Even in the middle of the worst crisis of his life, he was still checking my math. I fixed the calculations. He went back to his legal strategy. And the kitchen smelled like petrichor and coffee, and something that felt impossibly like the beginning of winning. The board meeting was at 9. Isen arrived at 8:45, which was unusual because he was pathologically early for everything. He had planned it. Mrs. Mori was already seated when he walked in, and the room had already absorbed her scent, her authority, her version of the narrative. By arriving after her, Isen let everyone see him enter on his own terms rather than sitting and waiting. He looked different. Not the battered, hollowed man of the past 2 weeks. He was wearing the suit he reserved for acquisitions, the dark charcoal one that made him look like someone who had been carved rather than born. His scent was open, fully released for the first time since the crisis began, and the cold marble and black cardamom filled the room with the kind of quiet authority that reminded every person at that table why they had followed him in the first place. He did not sit down. "Before we begin the vote on interim authority," he said, "I would like to enter 3 items into the record." Mrs. Mori's expression tightened. She had not expected him to come prepared. She had expected the guilt-stricken son who had spent the past week apologizing and explaining and defending. That son was not in the room. First, he placed a folder on the table. My complete medical records from the past 12 months, blood panels, hormone levels, designation stability metrics, every number within normal alpha range. I am not malfunctioning. My biology is not disordered. Ms. Ashford's interview was a strategic narrative designed to discredit me, and the data does not support it. The room went silent. Mrs. Mori's hand, which had been resting on the table, curled into a fist. Second, Another folder. Financial documentation showing that the Ashford pharmaceutical chain has been operating at a loss for 3 consecutive quarters. The merger Meera's family proposed as the foundation of this engagement was not a partnership. It was a bailout. The Ashfords needed us. We did not need them. Ms. Ashford's motivation for discrediting me is not concern for my health. It is the collapse of a deal her family cannot survive without. 2 board members exchanged glances. One of them, a woman named Carolyn who had served with Eisen's father, leaned forward and began reading. Third. Eisen looked directly at his mother. A personal statement. He did not read from notes. He spoke the way he always did when it mattered, directly and without decoration. I ended my engagement because I am in love with someone who is not Meera Ashford. That person is an alpha. His name is Theo Liang. He is a structural engineer, the owner of his own firm, and the most brilliant, stubborn, principled person I have ever known. He has been my closest friend for 20 years, and I have been in love with him for most of that time without understanding what I was feeling, because every authority in the world told me it was impossible. He paused. The boardroom was completely still. I know that alpha-alpha bonding is not recognized. I know that what I am describing has no precedent in designation medicine. I know that some of you are looking at me right now and thinking that my mother was right, that this is a confusion, a misfire, a temporary malfunction. But I am standing here because I would rather lose this company than spend another day pretending that obedience to a system that does not account for what I feel is the same thing as integrity. Mrs. Morey stood. Her chair scraped against the floor. "Isen," she said. Her voice was controlled, but there was a fracture in it that I do not think anyone else in that room would have recognized. "If you do this, there is no coming back." He looked at his mother, and for the first time, I think she saw him clearly. Not the heir, not the plan, not the architecture she had been building around him for 30 years. Just her son, standing in front of her, telling her the truth. "I know," he said. The vote was 11-6, in his favor. Carolyn cast the deciding vote. Afterward, she told Eisen that his father had once said the measure of an alpha was not how loudly he could command a room, but how quietly he could hold his ground when the room wanted him to move. She said Eisen's father would have been proud, and then she excused herself because she was not the kind of woman who cried in boardrooms. Mrs. Morey left without speaking to anyone. Her car was gone from the parking garage before the meeting officially adjourned. The designation disorder narrative collapsed within days. Eisen's medical records were clean, his hormone panels textbook alpha, and the journalist who had run the interview quietly retracted the framing after Eisen's lawyer made a call. Garrett Ashford, faced with the public exposure of his company's financial problems, withdrew from the pending lawsuit and stopped returning calls. Meera herself sent Eisen one final text. "You should have picked me. You would have been comfortable." What I did not know then was that the final text came after the breakfast with Mrs. Morey, the breakfast where Eisen's mother, desperate and strategic in her own right, had offered Meera a deal. "Help me bring him back, and the Ashford partnership survives. Refuse, and I let your family's finances become public record." Meera had walked into that breakfast honest and walked out weaponized. The interview was not revenge, it was survival, purchased at the cost of whatever honesty she had briefly allowed herself in my hallway. He showed it to me. I read it and handed his phone back. "Comfortable," I said. He shook his head. Comfortable is the most dangerous word in the English language. It is the word people use when they mean dead but functional. Mrs. Morey did not speak to Eisen for 3 weeks after the board meeting. He called her every day. She did not answer. He told me about it in the same flat, factual voice he used for project delays and supply chain problems, as if his mother's silence was a logistics issue rather than a grief that was hollowing him from the inside. On the 7th day, he drove to the estate. She would not come to the door. He sat in his car in her driveway for an hour and then drove home. On the 12th day, Carolyn called him. She told him his mother had come to her office that morning, unannounced, and sat across from her desk and asked a single question. Did he mean it? At the board meeting? When he said he would rather lose the company than keep pretending? Did he mean it, or was it a performance? Carolyn had said, I have known your son for 15 years. He does not perform. That is his mother's talent, not his. Mrs. Morey had left without responding. On the 15th day, Eisen found an envelope under the door of his apartment. Inside was a photograph he had never seen before. His father, young, maybe 25, standing with his arm around another alpha, both of them laughing. On the back, in his father's handwriting, a single line. Before your mother. Before all of it. Just us. Eisen brought the photograph to my apartment. We sat on the kitchen floor and looked at it for a long time. His father's face was open in a way Eisen had never seen in any family portrait, unguarded and young and entirely at ease beside this unnamed man. She never talked about this, Eisen said. No. He was quiet. Then he said, maybe she understood more than we thought, and maybe understanding something and accepting it for your own son are two different things. I did not hear from Mrs. Morey directly, but I heard what the photograph meant. She had kept it. For years, through a marriage and a death and the raising of a son, she had kept this picture of her husband with someone he had loved before her. She had not destroyed it. She had not pretended it did not exist. She had simply held it, privately, the way you hold a truth too complicated to speak. And now she had given it to Eisen. That was not approval. But it was the closest thing to I am trying that a woman like her knew how to say. 3 weeks after the board meeting, I was at my office finishing a seismic report when my phone rang. A number I did not recognize. Mr. Liang. A woman's voice, measured, formal, carefully neutral. This is Mrs. Morey, Eisen's mother, the woman who had tried to take his company from him 3 weeks ago. I set my pen down. I would like to invite you to dinner, Saturday evening, at the house. The silence on the line was heavy enough to have its own gravity. You do not have to accept, she continued, and I am not going to pretend this is easy for me. But my son has made his choice, and the alternative to accepting it is losing him. I have already lost his father. I am not going to lose Eisen over something I can learn to understand. That is not the same as approval, I said. No, it is not. But it is a door, and I am choosing to leave it open. Saturday evening, I put on the one blazer I owned that did not have drafting pencil marks on the cuffs, and I drove to the Morey estate with Eisen in the passenger seat. He was nervous. I could smell it underneath his marble, a brittle edge that sharpened every time we turned a corner closer to the house. She might change her mind, he said. She might sit us down and deliver a speech about legacy and biology and then ask us to leave. She might. Are you okay with that? I have spent 20 years walking through your mother's front door, knowing she did not want me there. One more dinner is not going to break me. He looked at me. The nervousness cracked, and underneath it, just for a second, was a warmth so open and unguarded that I had to look back at the road because my hands were not steady enough to hold the wheel and hold that look at the same time. We pulled into the driveway. The house was lit the way it always was for family dinners, warm light spilling from the windows onto the garden where Eisen and I had played as children, where he had taught me to throw a football badly, and I had taught him to identify load-bearing walls in the guest house, and we had both learned without words that some people just fit. Mrs. Morey met us at the door. She was wearing a simple dress and no jewelry, which was unusual for her. She looked at Isen first, and whatever she saw in his face made her expression soften a fraction of a degree. Then she looked at me. The silence lasted about 3 seconds, long enough for me to notice that her scent, which I had always perceived as sharp and territorial, had a quieter layer underneath it. Something tired, something that might, in the right light, be called grief. "Come in," she said. "Dinner will be ready in 20 minutes. We went in. Dinner was not comfortable. The conversation was careful, navigating around the obvious the way you navigate around a structural crack you know is there, but have agreed not to mention until the repair plans are finalized. Mrs. Morey asked about my firm. I answered honestly, without embellishing and without minimizing. She asked about the seismic work, and I explained it in the same terms I would use for any intelligent layperson, and she listened with an attention that surprised me. Isen sat between us, eating methodically and saying very little, which was how he operated when he was managing emotions too large for his usual composure. At one point, our scents drifted together. It happened without either of us trying. The marble warmed into graphite, the cardamom folded into rain, and the petrichor rose between us, subtle but unmistakable, filling the dining room with a scent that did not belong to either of us alone. Mrs. Morey noticed. I saw her nostrils flare, saw her pause with her fork halfway to her mouth, saw her look between us with an expression that was not approval and was not rejection but was something more complicated than either. Recognition, maybe. The reluctant acknowledgement that what she was smelling was not a malfunction. It was real. She did not comment on it. She set her fork down, picked it back up, and continued eating. After dinner, Isen helped clear the table while Mrs. Morey and I stood in the kitchen in the most excruciating silence of my life. Then she said, "He told me about the spelling bee. When you were 12. He brought a milkshake," I said. 2, she corrected. You bought him 2 the following year. The ghost of something that was not quite a smile crossed her face. He has never competed with anyone the way he competes with you. Not in business, not in anything. She paused. When he was 8, he came home from school and told me a boy had beaten him on a math test. He was furious, and then he smiled and said, "Finally." I assumed it was a phase. It was not. It was you. I did not know what to say to that. I am not going to pretend I understand this, she said, but I raised a son who knows his own mind. And if his mind has chosen you, then I need to learn to live with that, or I lose him entirely. She looked at me directly. Do not make me regret this. I will not. She nodded once. Then she turned back to the dishes, and the conversation was over. Isen appeared in the kitchen doorway a moment later, carrying dessert plates. He looked between us with the cautious hope of someone waiting for a verdict. Mrs. Morey took the plates from his hands. Your friend has good posture, she said. For an engineer. That was all. But Eisen's scent bloomed warm and full, the marble cracking into something golden. And when he looked at me, his eyes were bright. We drove home in the dark. The city lights spread out below the hill road, and the car smelled like us. Not like petrichor. Not like the impossible combined scent that the world had never catalogued. Just like Isen and Theo, marble and graphite, cardamom and rain. 2 scents that had lived next to each other for so long they had forgotten how to exist apart. Isen reached across the console and took my hand. His grip was warm and certain, and nothing like the desperate clutch at the engagement party. This was deliberate. Chosen. She called you my friend, he said. She will come around. What if she does not? Then we build something she has never seen. We show her what this looks like when it works. Not in a textbook. Not in a board meeting. In a kitchen, at a dinner table, over years of showing up and being real. That is how you earn trust from someone whose entire world was built on a plan that did not include you. He squeezed my hand. When did you get wise? I am an engineer. I think in long-term structural integrity. Give me 40 years and a stable foundation, and I can make anything stand. Is that a proposal? It is a load-bearing calculation. He laughed, full and warm and real, the laugh I had been earning since we were 7 years old, the one he saved for me and no one else. Ask me again in 10 years, I said, and he said, I will hold you to that. The end. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, tell me your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear from you. Until next time.